Imagine the American West in the 1870s, a vast, untamed landscape stretching from the deserts of Arizona to the rolling plains of Texas, dotted with mountains, rivers, and endless horizons. This was a land of extremes, where opportunity and danger walked side by side, and survival depended on skill, courage, and a touch of luck. The frontier was a stage for human drama, where everyday life blended with legend, and every dusty trail could lead to fortune or disaster. Cowboys were the icons of this era, but life on the range was far from the Hollywood version of clean-cut heroes. A typical day began at dawn around 4 a.m. when the first rays of sunlight touched the endless prairies. Before the cowboy lay his greatest responsibility, a herd of longhorn cattle, sometimes stretching hundreds of head, often on drives of hundreds or even thousands of miles. The work was grueling. A cowboy's day lasted 14 to 16 hours, filled with riding, roping, branding, and repairing fences. Horses, carefully chosen for endurance and agility, were a cowboy's lifeline, and saddle sores and blisters were constant companions. Mistakes could cost not only livestock, but sometimes life itself. The frontier was a melting pot of cultures and backgrounds. Cowboys were not all white Americans, many were Mexican vaqueros, skilled in cattle herding and horsemanship, while others were African Americans, Civil War veterans, or immigrants from Europe. Each brought their own techniques, traditions, and stories, contributing to a culture defined by resilience and improvisation. Understanding the land, the weather, and the behavior of cattle was as crucial as mastering a six-shooter. Danger was never far away. Bandits, rustlers, and rival cattle drivers threatened the livelihood of every ranch. Stagecoach robberies and train heists were not merely tales, they happened with alarming frequency. The introduction of railroads, while connecting distant towns and bringing settlers, also created new targets for outlaws. Some of these outlaws became legends. Billy the Kid, involved in the Lincoln County War in New Mexico, became infamous for his daring escapes and deadly marksmanship. Wild Bill Hickok, a lawman and gambler, was shot dead in a Deadwood saloon in 1876, cementing his place in folklore. Even women made their mark. Calamity Jane, renowned for her fearlessness and horsemanship, challenged gender norms and proved that survival on the frontier required strength and cunning, not just masculinity. Native American tribes were an inseparable part of frontier life. The Comanche, Lakota, Cheyenne, and other nations defended their lands and ways of life against settlers, miners, and soldiers. Cowboys and settlers often had to negotiate these complex dynamics. Understanding tribal customs, trade practices, and territorial boundaries could mean the difference between a safe journey and a deadly encounter. Conflicts were frequent, but so were moments of cooperation, as survival often required alliances and mutual understanding. The boom towns of the West added another layer of excitement and danger. Gold rushes and mining towns appeared almost overnight, brimming with prospectors, gamblers, saloons, and opportunists. Law enforcement was scarce or corrupt, making these towns playgrounds for both criminals and vigilantes. Gunfights in dusty streets, strategic alliances, and clever cons became part of everyday life. A single discovery of gold could turn a town into a bustling hub, while a failed mine could leave families destitute. Each boomtown had its legends, with events that could decide the fate of entire communities. Weapons and technology defined survival and advantage. Cowboys carried Colt revolvers, Winchester rifles, and knives, and relied on lassos and specialized saddles for daily work. Railroads were both a blessing and a curse, enabling faster transport, but also providing new opportunities for outlaws to strike. Communication remained slow. Telegrams were a lifeline for urgent messages, while newspapers spread tales that could both warn and entertain frontier communities. Life on the frontier was a constant negotiation between law and lawlessness. Figures like Wyatt Earp became legendary because they were perfect, but because they could navigate chaos with strategy, courage, and decisiveness. Outlaws operated by their own rules, creating folklore that blurred the line between hero and villain. For everyone living on the frontier, survival required observation, quick thinking, and the ability to read both the land and the people who inhabited it. In conclusion, the Wild West was a world defined by extremes. Cowboys, outlaws, settlers, and Native Americans all played roles in a landscape where opportunity and danger were inseparable. Their stories, full of grit, courage, and sometimes folly, created the legends we know today. In the chapters to come, we will ride alongside legendary outlaws, witness daring heists, explore gold rush towns, and uncover the untold stories of those who carved their lives from the unforgiving, exhilarating American frontier. As the frontier expanded in the late 19th century, the line between hero and villain blurred. The West was a land where survival often required bending or breaking the law. Outlaws became larger-than-life figures. Their stories carried on the wind like smoke from campfires, and their actions forever etched into the history of the American frontier. To understand the Wild West, we must meet the men and women who shaped it, for better or worse. Take Jesse James 1847-1882, perhaps the most famous outlaw of his era. Born in Missouri, James grew up during the turbulence of the Civil War, a period that fueled both vengeance and opportunity. Along with his brother Frank, he formed the James Younger Gang, robbing banks, trains, and stagecoaches across Missouri, Kansas, and neighboring states. Unlike random criminals, Jesse's raids were meticulously planned, often targeting institutions linked to Union forces during the war. His daring escapes, disguises, and strategic mind created a reputation that transformed him from mere bandit to legend. The law could chase him, but he often stayed one step ahead, turning each confrontation into a story told and retold in newspapers and folk songs. Then there was Billy the Kid, born Henry McCarty, another figure whose life seems scripted for legend. Active during the Lincoln County War in New Mexico, Billy became notorious for his marksmanship and audacity, allegedly killing over a dozen men by the age of 21. His life was short but intense, ending when Pat Garrett, the lawman assigned to capture him, shot him in 1881. Despite his criminal activities, Billy the Kid became a symbol of the chaotic, lawless frontier where young men could rise and fall with breathtaking speed. Outlaws weren't always men. Figures like Belle Starr 1848-1889 illustrate the complexity of frontier life. Known as the Bandit Queen, she engaged in horse theft, smuggling, and even aided gangs of outlaws. Starr navigated a male-dominated criminal world with cunning and charisma, proving that danger and influence on the frontier were not limited by gender. Her story highlights how survival, rebellion, and opportunity were intertwined in the West. Of course, for every outlaw, there were lawmen trying to bring order. Wyatt Earp 18,481,929, best known for the gunfight at the OK. Corral in Tombstone, Arizona, embodied the frontier lawman, strategic, brave, and occasionally morally ambiguous. His brothers, Morgan and Virgil, fought alongside him in one of the most famous confrontations of the West, facing the Clanton-McCrory gang in a 30-second firefight that became legend. These confrontations were rarely glamorous. Behind the story of heroism, months of tension, preparation, and negotiation, as lawmen sought to maintain order in towns where guns often settled disputes faster than courts could. Stagecoach robberies and train heists were staples of the outlaw economy. The Great Western Train robbery of 1873 in Colorado saw masked bandits halt a moving train, subdue the crew, and escape with thousands of dollars in gold and cash. Such events were dangerous, but calculated. The outlaws studied schedules, scouting routes, and understanding law enforcement response times. These robberies were not only criminal acts, but also tactical operations, blending planning, bravery, and improvisation. Mining towns and boomtowns provided another canvas for adventure and chaos. Places like Deadwood, South Dakota, or Virginia City, Nevada, swelled overnight with prospectors, merchants, and gamblers seeking fortune. The discovery of gold or silver transformed quiet plains into bustling hubs, but law and order often lagged behind population growth. Vigilante committees sometimes formed to enforce justice where sheriffs could not, resulting in public hangings, shootouts, and dramatic court cases that captured the imagination of the nation. Life on the frontier demanded mastery of weapons and survival skills. Cowboys and outlaws alike relied on Winchester rifles, Colt revolvers, and Bowie knives, as well as their horses, to navigate dangerous terrain. Gunfights required not only accuracy, but awareness of surroundings, timing, and the psychology of opponents. Every skirmish, chase, or robbery carried the potential for death or capture, making courage, cunning, and quick reflexes essential. Native American relations added further complexity. Tribes such as the Comanche, Apache, and Cheyenne were formidable forces, often defending their land against settlers and lawmen alike. Outlaws and cowboys traversing these territories had to understand local customs, terrain, and politics. Some formed alliances or traded with tribes, while others clashed violently. Survival demanded respect for both the land and its original inhabitants, even amid the chaos of frontier life. The legends of the West were not just tales of violence. They were stories of resilience, ingenuity, and adaptation. Outlaws like Jesse James or Billy the Kid captured imaginations because they symbolized freedom and defiance. Lawmen like Wyatt Earp or Pat Garrett earned respect because they embodied courage and strategy in a world governed as much by chance as by law. Women like Calamity Jane and Belle Starr proved that toughness and resourcefulness were not gendered qualities. In summary, the Wild West was a crucible where ordinary people became legends through daring, skill, and circumstance. Outlaws, lawmen, cowboys, and settlers all contributed to the myth and reality of frontier life. In the chapters to come, we will ride alongside more legendary figures, explore daring robberies, witness the trials of mining towns, and uncover the untold adventures that defined an era. The frontier was dangerous, thrilling, and unpredictable, a world where every decision could mean life or death, and every story could become history. By the 1860s and 1870s, the American West was undergoing rapid transformation. Gold and silver discoveries had sparked frenzies of migration, leading to the rise of boomtowns, temporary cities that could appear overnight and vanish just as quickly. The Comstock lode in Nevada, discovered in 1859, brought thousands of prospectors to Virginia City, transforming it into one of the wealthiest mining towns of the era. Similarly, Colorado's Pikes Peak Gold Rush, 1858-1861, drew men and women hoping to strike it rich, often facing harsh winters, disease, and treacherous terrain. Life in these boomtowns was a mix of hope, chaos, and opportunity. Saloon doors swung constantly, echoing with laughter, music, and sometimes gunfire. Gambling dens, boarding houses, and makeshift shops competed for attention, while law enforcement struggled to maintain order. Many towns relied on volunteer sheriffs or vigilante committees to impose a semblance of justice, often leading to swift, sometimes brutal consequences for wrongdoers. Public hangings, shootouts, and courtroom dramas were common, but they also became the fabric of frontier folklore. Railroads accelerated the transformation of the West. The completion of the first transcontinental railroad in 1869 connected the east and west coasts, facilitating the transport of goods, people, and cattle. Railroads also reshaped the strategies of outlaws and lawmen alike. Trains became targets for robbery, as gold shipments, payrolls, and valuable cargo moved across vast distances with only a handful of guards. The famous 1873 Great Western Train robbery in Colorado highlighted the audacity of frontier criminals who studied timetables, scouted routes, and executed near-perfect heists. Such robberies were dangerous, but calculated, requiring teamwork, timing, and nerves of steel. Mining towns and rail lines also brought diverse populations into close contact. Immigrants from Europe, freed African Americans, and settlers from the East mingled with Native Americans and Mexican vaqueros, creating a multicultural but often tense environment. Trading posts and markets became hubs of exchange, not only for goods, but for news, rumors, and intelligence. Cowboys, outlaws, and settlers alike had to navigate this human landscape with the same skill they used to navigate open plains. Gold and silver rushes also influenced the careers of legendary figures. Jesse James and his gang often capitalized on mining wealth, targeting banks that stored miners' earnings. Lawmen like Wyatt Earp occasionally followed similar paths, moving between boomtowns to enforce order or protect wealthy interests. The frontier economy, built on precious metals, livestock, and trade, created opportunities for risk-takers to become infamous or prosperous almost overnight. The terrain itself posed constant challenges. Mountains, rivers, and deserts could be as dangerous as human threats. Crossing the Rocky Mountains in winter could mean frostbite or death. Deserts like the Mojave or Sonoran tested endurance and navigation skills. Cowboys and outlaws learned to read the land, tracking animals, finding water, and anticipating weather changes. Maps were rudimentary, and survival often depended on memory, instinct, and the counsel of experienced locals. Women in mining towns and along cattle trails played crucial roles, often overlooked in popular depictions. From boarding house proprietors who managed finances and enforced rules, to women like Calamity Jane, who participated directly in exploration and conflict, they shaped frontier society. Their presence was both stabilizing and adventurous, contributing to the culture of resilience that defined the West. Technology and innovation altered frontier life as well. Telegraphs allowed distant towns to communicate quickly. Newspapers spread stories that became legend, and new firearms changed the balance of power. Cowboys adapted, using tools like the Winchester rifle for protection and hunting, and the Colt revolver for both work and defense. Even simple items, ropes, saddles, and stirrups could mean the difference between life and death on long cattle drives or dangerous expeditions. The Gold Rush era also amplified tensions with Native American tribes. Mining operations and railroad expansion encroached on lands vital for hunting and living. Clashes were frequent, but interactions could also be cooperative, with trade and negotiation shaping local dynamics. For cowboys, miners, and outlaws alike, Understanding these relationships was essential for survival, as one wrong move could lead to a deadly encounter. In conclusion, the gold rushes and railroads transformed the American West, creating new opportunities and new dangers. Boomtowns, train robberies, and mining camps were stages for adventure, ingenuity, and risk. Cowboys, outlaws, and settlers navigated these rapidly changing landscapes, their lives a constant mix of survival, ambition, and sometimes sheer luck. As we move into the next chapter, we will explore the gunfights, cattle drives, and legendary duels that defined life on the open plains and the towns that rose and sometimes fell with the frontier. The image of the Wild West is inseparable from the sound of a six-shooter echoing through a dusty street. Gunfights were not constant, but when they happened, they could turn ordinary towns into stages of legend. Understanding these confrontations gives us insight not just into violence, but into the culture, strategy, and survival instincts of the frontier. Take the gunfight at the O.K. Corral, perhaps the most famous shootout in Western history, on October 26, 1881, in Tombstone, Arizona. Lawman Wyatt Earp, his brothers Virgil and Morgan, and Doc Holliday faced the Clanton-McClory gang. The confrontation lasted barely 30 seconds, yet it became emblematic of the West. Newspapers at the time sensationalized it, creating heroes and villains out of men who were, in reality, simply navigating a dangerous, lawless environment. Earp's strategic positioning, Holliday's sharpshooting skills, and the gang's miscalculations turned a moment of survival into a legendary tale. But gunfights were not always about fame. They were often brutal, unpredictable, and deadly. Outlaws like Jesse James and Billy the Kid relied on speed, precision, and knowledge of the terrain. Ambushes on stagecoaches, raids on banks, and confrontations in mining towns required meticulous planning. Every misstep could be fatal, and every decision demanded nerves of steel. The West was a place where a simple misunderstanding could escalate into bloodshed, and where courage and cunning were equally valuable. Cattle towns like Abilene, Dodge City, and Wichita had their own reputations. These hubs of commerce and cattle trade were often rife with tension. Cowboys drove herds hundreds of miles along trails, such as the Chisholm Trail, and towns teemed with saloons, gambling halls, and boarding houses. Fights could erupt over debts, insults, or disputes over property and livestock. Local lawmen were tasked with maintaining order, often relying on informal methods like posse formations or vigilantism when official justice lagged. Weapons defined the outcome of these conflicts. The Colt single-action Army revolver, introduced in 1873, became the iconic sidearm of the West. Its reliability and ease of use made it a favorite for lawmen, outlaws, and cowboys alike. Rifles like the Winchester Model 1873 offered long-range accuracy, essential for defending homesteads or engaging in raids. But skill, timing, and psychological awareness often mattered more than firepower. A cowboy or outlaw who could read body language, anticipate movement, and control fear had a distinct advantage. Not all confrontations were male-dominated. Women occasionally played critical roles in showdowns and defense. Figures like Calamity Jane participated in armed conflicts, while others managed saloons, homesteads, and boarding houses, indirectly shaping outcomes by controlling resources, intelligence, or refuge. Their stories remind us that frontier survival was a community effort, not solely the domain of gunslingers. Native American interactions also influenced gunfights. Tribes like the Apache, Comanche, and Cheyenne were formidable opponents, skilled in guerrilla tactics and intimately familiar with the terrain. Settlers, miners, and lawmen who encroached on tribal lands often faced ambushes, raids, or strategic attacks. Learning the landscape, weather patterns, and tribal customs was as critical as mastering a firearm. Survival depended on situational awareness, adaptability, and sometimes diplomacy. The culture of the West elevated gunfights into legend. Newspapers, dime novels, and storytellers exaggerated events, blending fact with fiction. A skirmish in a mining town could become a tale of heroism or betrayal, repeated and embellished until the line between reality and myth blurred. Figures like Wild Bill Hickok, killed while holding what became known as the dead man's hand, illustrate how personal stories intertwined with cultural narrative, creating lasting icons. Every gunfight, duel, or ambush reflected the broader tensions of frontier life. Law versus lawlessness, settlement versus freedom, civilization versus wilderness. Cowboys, outlaws, lawmen, and settlers navigated this world with a mix of courage, strategy, and luck. Each confrontation carried lessons about human behavior, leadership, and survival under pressure. In conclusion, gunfights were more than spectacles, they were expressions of a complex society where justice, opportunity, and danger were intertwined. From the legendary O.K. Corral to the dusty streets of boomtowns, these confrontations shaped the mythology and reality of the American West. In the next chapter, we will ride along the cattle trails, explore the life of cowboys on long drives, and discover how these journeys define not just work, but identity, culture, and adventure on the frontier. Communication and teamwork were vital. One mistaken missed signal, an unobserved stray, or a poorly timed river crossing could lead to a stampede, injuries, or even death. Life on the trail was grueling. Cowboys rode 10 to 14 hours a day, often in extreme weather. Nights were spent under the open sky, sometimes in makeshift camps with only minimal protection. They prepared meals over campfires, tended to horses, and kept watch for predators or rustlers. Hygiene was sparse, and disease could spread quickly. Despite the hardships, camaraderie formed through shared experiences. Around campfires, cowboys sang songs, told stories, and swapped tall tales both to entertain and to share vital lessons for survival. The cattle themselves required constant attention. Longhorns, with their wide horns and sometimes stubborn temperament, needed careful management. Cowboys used lassos, driving techniques, and understanding of herd behavior to keep animals moving and prevent panic. Stampedes were a constant threat. A herd of 1,500 cattle could be spooked by lightning, a predator, or a misstep from a rider, leading to destruction, loss, or death. Every cowboy had to react instantly, relying on skill, experience, and teamwork. Cowboys were far from a homogeneous group. Mexican vaqueros introduced essential skills like roping, branding, and horse breaking. African American cowboys, many of whom were Civil War veterans, brought innovation, resilience, and leadership. European immigrants added unique methods of cattle management and navigation. Together, these diverse individuals created a rich cultural tapestry that defined the cowboy way of life. The trails were not just about cattle, they were about adventure and danger. Cowboys faced wild animals like wolves, mountain lions, and snakes. They navigated unknown terrain, unpredictable rivers, and sudden weather changes. Rustlers and outlaws frequently attempted to steal cattle or attack the herd. Cowboys had to be alert, resourceful, and sometimes willing to use their Colt revolvers or Winchester rifles to protect their charges. Women played roles as well, though often overlooked. Some traveled with the drives as cooks, caretakers, or guides. Their presence was crucial to maintaining order and morale, and they contributed significantly to the social fabric of life on the trail. Economic pressures were ever present. The success of a drive directly affected ranch profits, and delays, accidents, or theft could be disastrous. Railroads allowed cattle to reach distant markets, but also introduced competition and stricter schedules. Cowboys and trail bosses had to balance speed with caution, always prioritizing the safety of both herd and crew. In conclusion, cattle drives were more than a job, they were an immersive adventure, demanding courage, skill, and resilience. Cowboys navigated harsh terrain, unpredictable weather, human threats, and daily challenges while forming bonds, traditions, and a culture that would define the American West. Their journeys, both practical and legendary, became the backbone of frontier mythology. The skills, endurance, and stories they carried along the trails continue to fascinate us, illustrating the daring and resilience required to survive and thrive in one of America's most iconic eras. As the West matured beyond the chaos of boomtowns and cattle drives, ranching became one of its defining industries. Large-scale ranches, sometimes spanning hundreds of thousands of acres, transformed the landscape and created a new hierarchy of power. Cowboys continued to play a crucial role, but now they often worked under ranch owners who wielded enormous economic and social influence. Understanding the rise of these ranching empires reveals much about the frontier's complexities, the blending of opportunity, conflict, and survival. The largest ranches, like the King Ranch in Texas, founded in 1853, or the Zit Ranch in the Texas Panhandle, covered vast territories, encompassing multiple counties. These operations required hundreds of cowboys, multiple foremen, and intricate management systems to track cattle, grazing patterns, and seasonal migrations. Longhorns, prized for their hardiness, roamed freely over wide pastures, and cowboys relied on skill, strategy, and endurance to ensure that herds remained healthy and productive. Ranching was not without conflict. Land disputes were common, especially as settlers and homesteaders moved west under the Homestead Act of 1862, claiming plots of land previously used for grazing. Large ranchers, who depended on open range access, often clashed with small farmers fencing off property. These range wars could escalate to violence, involving hired guns, vigilantes, and legal battles. One notable example was the Johnson County War 1892 in Wyoming, where wealthy cattle barons confronted smaller ranchers, resulting in armed skirmishes and the involvement of state militia. The frontier economy was thus not just about cattle, it was about power, influence, and survival. Cowboys on these ranches experienced both adventure and discipline. Daily life involved long hours, often riding 10 to 12 miles a day, rounding cattle, repairing fences, and ensuring water access. Seasonal tasks like branding, calving, and winter preparation required teamwork, stamina, and strategy. Cowboys also had to deal with predators, wolves, coyotes, and mountain lions, as well as disease outbreaks among cattle, which could devastate herds and fortunes alike. Their work demanded not just physical skill, but knowledge of animal behavior, weather patterns, and the geography of vast and often unforgiving terrain. Economic pressures shaped ranching strategies. Railroads, now more widespread, allowed cattle to reach distant markets, connecting Texas and Colorado ranches to booming cities in the east. However, rail expansion also brought competition, increased taxes, and vulnerability to outlaws who targeted shipments. Wealthy ranchers adapted by hiring guards, organizing stampedes strategically, and sometimes engaging in covert operations to protect assets. This mix of risk, innovation, and resourcefulness defined the business of ranching in the late 19th century. Interactions with Native American tribes continued to influence ranch operations. Tribes like the Comanche, Apache, and Kiowa resisted encroachment on traditional hunting grounds, creating tension over grazing rights and water access. Some ranchers negotiated agreements or traded supplies, while others confronted tribes militarily, escalating violence and reshaping the frontier landscape. Cowboys often acted as intermediaries, navigating these tensions daily while maintaining their primary duties. Survival demanded adaptability, diplomacy, and awareness of both human and environmental challenges. Life on large ranches also fostered community and culture. Cowboys shared stories, songs, and traditions passed down from vaqueros, African American cowboys, and other immigrants. Rodeos, horse-breaking competitions, and informal games helped maintain morale and build camaraderie. These cultural practices reinforced skills essential for survival and created a distinct identity celebrated in frontier folklore. Women, though fewer in number, played vital roles as cooks, caretakers, and sometimes mediators, ensuring that life on sprawling ranches remained functional and cohesive. Violence and lawlessness were never far from ranch life. Disputes over cattle theft, water rights, or land boundaries could escalate quickly. Famous feuds like the Lincoln County Range War or conflicts in Arizona demonstrated how economic competition, personal grudges, and frontier justice intertwined. Cowboys had to be prepared to defend the herd, the ranch, and sometimes their own lives, often without immediate law enforcement support. Firearms, strategic thinking, and knowledge of the terrain were critical, making each day a test of vigilance and skill. In addition to conflict, ranching empires shaped the economy and identity of the West. The consolidation of land and herds created wealth and influence, while smaller ranchers and settlers navigated the challenges of survival and competition. Cowboys were at the center of this system, blending hard labor, expertise, and bravery to keep the frontier moving. Their stories, filled with endurance, ingenuity, and occasional daring, became the backbone of Western mythology. In conclusion, the rise of ranching empires transformed the American West, blending economics, adventure, and conflict. Cowboys, lawmen, settlers, and Native Americans all interacted within this dynamic, shaping the landscape and the culture. Land disputes, cattle drives, and life on sprawling ranches created challenges that tested courage, skill, and resourcefulness daily. In the next chapter, we will explore the legendary outlaws who terrorized ranches and towns alike, the gunfights that made them infamous, and the adventures that cemented their place in Western lore. While ranching empires expanded and cattle drives forged the rhythm of the frontier, another force shaped the Wild West: outlaws. These men and women became living legends, capturing imaginations through their daring, audacity, and sometimes sheer recklessness. To understand the West, one must understand them not just as criminals, but as complex individuals navigating a chaotic and often lawless environment. Jesse James remains one of the most infamous figures of this era. Born in 1847 in Missouri, he was shaped by the turbulence of the Civil War, during which his family sympathized with the Confederacy. Along with his brother Frank, Jesse formed the James Younger Gang, targeting banks, trains, and stagecoaches. Their robberies were carefully planned. Jesse often chose targets connected to Union supporters, blending revenge with profit. Yet it was his charisma and daring escapes that made him legendary. Newspapers romanticized his exploits, portraying him as a Robin Hood figure. though in reality his actions were often violent and self-serving. Billy the Kid, another iconic outlaw, became notorious in New Mexico during the Lincoln County War. Born Henry McCarty in 1859, Billy was only in his teens when he joined the conflict. Allegedly responsible for more than a dozen killings, he combined fearless marksmanship with uncanny agility and intelligence. Norman Pat Garrett ultimately ended his life in 1881, but not before Billy had cemented his place in folklore. His story illustrates the thin line between survival and notoriety, and how youth, opportunity, and chaos could create legend on the frontier. Outlaws were not exclusively men. Belle Starr, known as the Bandit Queen, was deeply involved in horse theft, smuggling, and assisting gangs. Born in 1848, she navigated the dangerous, male-dominated criminal world with cunning and charisma. Women like Belle showed that the frontier required resourcefulness and audacity from everyone, regardless of gender. Their stories also challenged the romanticized perception of cowboys and outlaws, adding depth to the mythology of the West. Robberies and confrontations were not random acts of violence, they were tactical operations. Train heists, for instance, required planning, reconnaissance, and precise timing. The famous Union Pacific train robberies of the 1870s and 1880s showcased how gangs studied timetables, scouted terrain, and executed coordinated attacks. Cowboys, lawmen, and even hired guards had to anticipate these moves, often leading to high-stakes standoffs on the open prairie. Small towns became theaters for dramatic encounters. Abilene, Dodge City, and Deadwood were hubs for commerce and cattle, but also for criminal opportunity. Gunfights erupted over debts, personal slights, or rivalries between gangs. Lawmen like Wyatt Earp and his brothers became central figures in maintaining order, but their roles were often ambiguous. Enforcement of the law required negotiation, strategy, and occasionally direct confrontation. Survival in these towns depended on quick reflexes, awareness, and the ability to read both people and situations. Native American interactions influenced outlaw activity as well. Tribes such as the Comanche, Apache, and Cheyenne were skilled in guerrilla tactics, making raids and escapes both perilous and fascinating. Some outlaws formed alliances with tribes for knowledge of terrain or temporary refuge, while others clashed violently. Cowboys navigating these lands needed not only skill with weapons and horses, but also diplomacy and cultural awareness to survive. Weapons defined reputation and survival. The Colt single-action Army revolver became the symbol of frontier, justice, and defiance, while rifles like the Winchester Model 1873 provided long-range advantage. Yet skill and timing often mattered more than firepower. A well-placed shot, a quick draw, or the ability to anticipate an opponent's move could mean life or death. Stories of duels and standoffs, exaggerated in newspapers and dime novels, contributed to the mythos of the West, blending fact and fiction into enduring legends. Beyond individual fame, outlaws reflected broader social tensions, economic inequality, post-war resentment, and limited law enforcement created conditions where rebellion was often as practical as it was daring. Figures like Jesse James and Billy the Kid became symbols of defiance, whether justified or romanticized. Their actions, intertwined with frontier economics, expansion, and culture, illustrate the complex interplay of survival, morality, and myth in the West. In conclusion, outlaws were more than criminals, they were agents of legend. Their daring, strategy, and sometimes reckless behavior shaped the frontier narrative, influencing towns, ranches, and the broader culture of the West. Cowboys, lawmen, and settlers had to navigate a world where fame, danger, and morality intersected unpredictably. In the next chapter, we will explore the daily lives of cowboys on extended drives, the rhythms of ranch work, and the untold adventures that define their identity and the culture of the frontier. The heartbeat of the American West pulsed along the cattle trails. Beyond the saloons, gunfights, and boomtowns, the true daily adventure of frontier life unfolded on the open range. Cowboys spent months guiding herds across hundreds of miles, navigating terrain both beautiful and unforgiving. These journeys define not just the economy, but the culture, identity, and legends of the West. Long cattle drives, often covering 1,000 miles or more, were tests of endurance, skill, and courage. The Chisholm Trail, stretching from southern Texas to Abilene, Kansas, became one of the most iconic routes, while the Western Trail and Goodnight Loving Trail served herds moving north and west. Each trail presented unique challenges, rivers and creeks to ford, rough terrain to cross, and unpredictable weather ranging from scorching heat to sudden blizzards. Cowboys needed to anticipate obstacles, manage the herd's pace, and maintain both animal and rider health. A single misstep, a stampede, a river crossing gone wrong could result in disaster. Cowboys lived intimately with their horses and cattle. Horses were more than transportation, they were partners in survival. Skilled riders could sense a herd's mood, predict stampedes, and respond instantly to threats. Cattle themselves required careful attention. Longhorns, with their stubborn nature and wide horns, could be challenging to manage, especially in dense herds or during night watches. Branding, roping, and driving were daily rituals, blending practicality with skill honed over years of experience. The dangers were constant. Predators such as wolves and mountain lions stalked both livestock and cowboys. Outlaws or rustlers might attempt to steal a herd under the cover of night. Disease could decimate cattle and affect men alike. Cowboys also faced the unpredictable temperament of the land itself. Flash floods could sweep away horses and livestock. Fires could destroy pastures, and harsh winters could trap herds in snowdrifts. Survival required vigilance, resilience, and ingenuity at every turn. Life on the trail was physically demanding but culturally rich. Cowboys shared stories, songs, and told tales around nightly campfires. This oral tradition preserved skills, history, and humor, fostering camaraderie and mutual support. Many cowboys were immigrants. Mexican vaqueros brought roping techniques and horsemanship traditions. African Americans brought resilience and innovation, and European settlers contributed unique methods for managing herds and navigating terrain. This multicultural tapestry defined frontier life and created the enduring image of the cowboy as both skilled laborer and folk hero. Interactions with Native American tribes were a complex part of trail life. Tribes such as the Comanche, Apache, and Kiowa controlled large swaths of land and could be both allies and obstacles. Cowboys learned to negotiate access to water sources, avoid sacred grounds, and, when necessary, defend themselves. Knowledge of tribal customs, terrain, and seasonal patterns was essential for survival. Missteps could lead to confrontations that tested courage and strategy, reinforcing the delicate balance of power on the frontier. The trail was also a place of innovation and adaptation. Cowboys developed efficient ways to move cattle, signal between riders, and handle emergencies. Techniques for crossing rivers, breaking wild horses, and controlling stampedes were passed down through experience. Even small items like saddles, ropes, and spurs were optimized for durability and efficiency. Firearms, Winchester rifles, and Colt revolvers were tools of protection and problem solving. though skill often mattered more than weaponry in ensuring safety and success. Despite hardship, the trail offered moments of beauty and reflection. Sunrises over rolling plains, quiet nights under star-filled skies, and the rhythmic sounds of hoofbeats created an almost meditative environment. Cowboys formed bonds with each other and with their animals, relying on trust, communication, and instinct. These journeys shaped not only practical skills, but character, resilience, and a sense of identity rooted in the land and its challenges. Economic and social pressures shaped these adventures as well. Cattle drives were vital to connecting ranches with railheads and markets, fueling the frontier economy. Delays, theft, or mismanagement could have financial consequences for both ranchers and cowboys. Yet these risks also created opportunities for ingenuity and heroism, giving rise to the legends of men and women who navigated danger with courage and cleverness. In conclusion, life on the trails was the crucible of cowboy culture. Long drives tested endurance, skill, and nerve, while creating opportunities for adventure, camaraderie, and survival. Cowboys navigated unpredictable weather, wild animals, hostile terrain, and human threats with ingenuity and resilience. Their stories, forged on dusty trails under the open sky, became the foundation of the mythology of the American West. In the next chapter, we will explore the intricate dynamics between lawmen and outlaws, examining famous pursuits, standoffs, and the thin line between justice and survival on the frontier. As the West expanded, the clash between lawmen and outlaws became one of its defining features. Justice was often improvised, reputation mattered as much as evidence, and a single confrontation could become legend. Understanding these dynamics helps us see the frontier just as a lawless expanse, but as a place where strategy, courage, and cunning determine survival. Some of the most famous lawmen, like Wyatt Earp, Pat Garrett, and Bat Masterson, were as legendary as the outlaws they pursued. Wyatt Earp, along with his brothers Virgil and Morgan, became immortalized by the gunfight at the OK Corral in Tombstone, Arizona, in 1881. That 30-second shootout was a microcosm of frontier justice. Tension, preparation, and split-second decisions determined life or death. Though widely publicized and dramatized, Earp's career illustrates the balance lawman maintained between authority and survival, often operating in towns where allegiance and power were fluid. Pat Garrett, the lawman who famously killed Billy the Kid in 1881, exemplifies the combination of strategy and persistence required to enforce order. Garrett tracked Billy across New Mexico, using intelligence from informants, understanding of terrain, and careful planning to corner him. The pursuit was more than mere heroics, it was a calculated operation, demonstrating that law enforcement on the frontier required patience, cunning, and adaptability. Gunfights and duels were a constant risk. Frontier towns, from Dodge City to Deadwood, often lacked formal courts, and reputation often dictated justice. Duels were sometimes ritualized, with seconds, formal challenges, and codes of conduct, while other times, spontaneous violence erupted from personal disputes or conflicts over money, property, or influence. A cowboy, outlaw, or lawman needed not only physical skill, but psychological insight to anticipate opponents' actions, the ability to read intent, control fear, and act decisively could mean survival. Outlaws, however, were not passive participants. Figures like Jesse James, Belle Starr, and Billy the Kid used ingenuity, deception, and intimate knowledge of terrain to evade capture. Jesse James, for example, would disguise himself, change horses, and move unpredictably to avoid lawmen. Belstar leveraged networks of associates and intelligence to continue operations despite increasing law enforcement pressure. Billy the Kid's youthful agility allowed him to escape multiple arrests, earning a reputation that blurred the line between myth and reality. The pursuit of justice often involved coordination, communication, and improvisation. Lawmen formed passes, enlisted locals, and used scouts to track fugitives across rugged terrain. Intelligence from newspapers, telegraphs, and informants could mean the difference between capturing an outlaw and watching them vanish into the prairie. Each pursuit was a high-stakes game of anticipation, strategy, and endurance. Native American territories added complexity. Lawmen and outlaws alike had to navigate tribal lands with caution. Tribes had their own rules, and confrontations could be deadly if mismanaged. Understanding local customs, paths, and seasonal patterns was essential for anyone operating across the frontier. Cowboys, outlaws, and lawmen all relied on this knowledge for survival, blending respect, observation, and sometimes force in a delicate balance. Technology shaped these confrontations as well. Rifles, revolvers, and ammunition became more reliable, giving lawmen and outlaws tools for long-range precision. Telegraphs allowed for faster communication between towns, aiding in coordination of pursuits. Railroads not only moved cattle and goods, but also influenced strategy. Outlaws targeted trains, and lawmen often anticipated these moves. The interplay of technology, human skill, and terrain created a dynamic chessboard where every move mattered. Social and cultural pressures also shaped frontier justice. Wealthy ranchers, miners, and merchants demanded protection, while towns sought stability. Outlaws challenged disorder, exploiting gaps in law enforcement and capitalizing on the chaos of expansion. Lawmen had to act decisively, balancing enforcement, diplomacy, and sometimes personal survival. Their stories became legendary because they operated in a space where morality, legality, and survival intersected unpredictably. In conclusion, lawmen and their pursuit of outlaws defined much of the mythology of the American West. From strategic operations to legendary duels, every confrontation reflected broader tensions: law versus lawlessness, civilization versus freedom, and morality versus survival. Cowboys, lawmen, and outlaws alike navigated this world with skill, courage, and ingenuity. In the final chapter, we will examine the end of the frontier era, the decline of open-range life, and how the legends of the West transformed into the cultural mythology we celebrate today. By the late 1880s and early 1890s, the frontier that had defined the American West for decades was changing. Open ranges were being fenced, railroads expanded further, and towns grew more structured with courts, law enforcement, and commerce. The era of the wandering cowboy, the daring outlaw, and the untamed open prairie was drawing to a close. Yet, the stories and legends they created endure, shaping our perception of the West even today. One of the main forces transforming the frontier was fencing and barbed wire, patented by Joseph Glidden in 1874. Suddenly, open grazing lands were being sectioned off, limiting the freedom of long cattle drives and redefining how ranchers managed herds. Range wars erupted between large ranchers, small homesteaders, and new settlers who wanted to protect their property. Cowboys who had once roamed hundreds of miles now faced restrictions, and the nature of their work began to shift from adventure to more structured ranch duties. Railroads also consolidated the West's economy, linking ranches, mines, and cities in a way previously unimaginable. While this facilitated trade and cattle shipment, It also reduced the opportunities for the dramatic cattle drives and daring train robberies that had defined the earlier era. Outlaws found it increasingly difficult to operate as law enforcement and telegraph communication improved. Notorious figures like Jesse James were hunted more efficiently, and new generations of lawmen employed strategic planning rather than relying solely on personal courage. The decline of the open range did not erase the cowboy, it transformed him. Cowboys became ranch hands, rodeo performers, and symbols in popular culture. Figures like Buffalo Bill Cody captured the imagination of Americans through his Wild West shows, dramatizing gunfights, cattle drives, and encounters with Native Americans for audiences in the US and Europe. These performances immortalized the cowboy as an icon of freedom, resilience, and adventure, blending historical reality with theatrical spectacle. Native American communities continued to face displacement and conflict, which reshaped the cultural landscape of the West. Treaties, wars, and forced relocations removed tribes from traditional lands, allowing expansion, but also leaving a legacy of injustice. Cowboys and settlers had to navigate this transformed environment, balancing economic opportunity with the complex moral realities of settlement. Despite these changes, the myths and legends of the West persisted. Stories of gunfights at the O.K. Corral, daring cattle drives along the Chisholm Trail, and outlaws evading capture became part of American folklore. Newspapers, dime novels, and later films and television shows perpetuated these tales, often exaggerating or romanticizing events. The line between fact and legend blurred, creating enduring archetypes: the daring outlaw, the fearless lawman, the resilient cowboy, and the adventurous pioneer. Every cowboy, lawman, and outlaw contributed to this legacy. Cowboys exemplified endurance, skill, and adaptability, mastering horsemanship, cattle management, and survival. Lawman embodied strategy, courage, and moral complexity. Outlaws pushed the limits of daring, ingenuity, and audacity. Together, their stories illustrate the tension between civilization and freedom, order and chaos, myth and reality, an interplay that defines the cultural imagination of the West. Modern historians continue to study the era, revealing nuances behind the legends. Many cowboys were immigrants or African Americans, whose contributions shaped culture and practices on the range. Women also played critical roles, from managing ranches to guiding settlements. These perspectives enriched the narrative, showing that the frontier was not just a stage for white male heroes, but a complex society shaped by diverse people navigating opportunity and danger. In conclusion, the frontier may have closed, but its legacy endures. Cowboys, outlaws, lawmen, and settlers collectively created a world of adventure, risk, and ingenuity. The open ranges, cattle drives, and legendary duels formed stories that captured imaginations for generations. The American West became a symbol not only of a historical period, but of values, resilience, freedom, courage, and ingenuity. As we reflect on this era, we see how adventure, human drama, and survival intertwine to produce myths and realities that continue to fascinate the world.